So as the medieval arms race continued to evolve, soldiers now needed to find new and exciting ways to kill each other, as their armour was becoming just a bit too efficient, as sword and axe blows just deflected right off of it. Entering the Warhammer, a fantastically simple one-handed weapon that could inflict great blunt force trauma if you twatted someone around the head with it, or if you flipped it around, it possessed the penetrating power of a group of lads in Magaluf. The design of this magnificent beauty could be spiced up with a spike placed on top of it for extra versatility, as well as changing the blunt head out for a pronged head to act as if it was like a hungry alligator penetrating into your opponent's armour. Mounted soldiers would usually use a design with the pick end extended called the horseman's pick, as it allowed them greater length and range when striking their opponents, as well as an easier hook option when you're dragging a man off his horse. The bec de Corbin, meaning raven's beak in French, was a two-handed variation of this weapon for all those soldiers who wanted a lengthy member to make up for an unlengthy member they also had equipped. The force applied from a big swing from one of these bad boys could equal the penetrating force of a bullet, breaking bones and piercing vital organs. However, this did now come with a problem, as if you swung too hard, your weapon or beak could get stuck in your opponent's armour, and now they're lying dead on the floor, so you have no weapon. So if you did want this, make sure you did bring a backup weapon. So the longbowman was the pride of England's medieval war machine, a deadly weapon that contributed to against all odds victories during the 100 Years' War at Crécy, Poitiers and Agincourt. However, we have to go back a few years to understand how it really rose to prominence. The longbow was a 6-foot beast of around 150 pounds of draw weight, and it required a lifetime of training to use, but it lacked some serious mobility and it required excellent defensive positioning to get its greatest results. In 1332, during the Second Scottish Wars of Independence, a small English force consisting of roughly only 1,500 men, with 500 men at arms and the rest longwomen, landed on the east coast of Scotland, just outside of Perth, led by the English choice for the crown, Edward Balliol, who imagined that more Scots would join him along the way. After a victorious assault upon landing, they marched inwards and met an overwhelming Scottish force at the River Rhone on the 10th of August, and on the 11th of August, they lined up for battle. Chronicles at the time estimate the Scottish forces were in the region of between 20,000 all the way up to 40,000. However, modern estimates have brought that down to around 15,000. However, it still outnumbered this tiny English force over 10 to 1. 5 years prior, during the Weardale campaign, a bunch of English longwomen tried to dislodge the Scottish from a hill. However, they were thoroughly beaten and chased off by a bunch of Scottish cavalry as they were poorly defended. This time though, they took up an extremely defensive position with the soldiers they had. All the English men-at-arms had dismounted and were holding a line of roughly 180 metres wide, with the longwomen placed either side of them on raised and rocky terrain. The extremely confident Scots pressed on towards the English centre in a schiltron formation, with the landscape acting as a funnel towards the English centre, and they pushed the English line back around 10 metres. However, they did not break. As more Scots rushed in from behind, colliding with their own troops in front, they created a mighty press, with the English longwomen having easy pickings from either side, and if they pushed the English line back more and more, their flanks would just be further exposed to the rain of arrows. The Scottish were crushing one another in a tight press and suffocating where they stood, and if they fell over, they were trampled to death, with it saying more Scottish were slain by themselves than the actual English, and the heaps of dead were lying in piles higher than spears. The number of Scottish dead is cited as high as 15,000 by English chroniclers, while the Scottish put it at around 3,000 nobles, and they didn't count the lowborn men in that. On the English side, a precise figure is given of 35, with a lot of accounts stressing not a single archer. The overwhelming victory at the Battle of Duplin Moor and the tactic to funnel the enemy into a centre with longwomen either side would have been noted by the English King Edward III, and it most likely would have inspired his victory at Crécy and the subsequent victory at Agincourt by Henry V. As the medieval arms race continued to evolve, soldiers had to come up with new and creative ways to kill each other, as the knight now began to resemble a walking tank. Enter this beautiful beast here, the Rondel Dagger, the perfect sidearm for any 15th century man-at-arms. A long and slim blade with a tapering needle point, measuring roughly 12 to 16 inches, perfect for penetrating another man, or forcing the mail links open and finding the weak spots in the opponent's plate armour. The dagger gets its name rondel from its round-shaped pommel and handguard, and it was exceptionally long compared to other fighting knives. They were often used in an ice pick overhand grip, which was perfect for a brutal stabbing attack which could penetrate plate armour at its weak points and allowed for an extra grappling point during hand-to-hand combat. The rondel dagger was a dedicated fighting knife that didn't lend itself too well to a slashing attack, but was perfect for a stabbing attack. And if you had one of these, it was probably a sign you had a bit of disposable income. So this beautiful creature here is the poleaxe, one of the finest weapons ever to see the battlefield in 15th century Europe. As the medieval arms race continued to evolve, the foot soldier needed new weapons to cause damage to the armour that the blacksmiths were now developing, and the poleaxe was the perfect answer. The poleaxe consisted of a wooden shaft up to 2 meters long and a steel head that combined 3 weapons into one. An axe that could be used for slashing attacks and to hook a man off a horse, a sharp pointed end that could be used as a spear or to find the weak points in the enemy armour, and last but not least, a hammer to inflict blunt force trauma on the victim. Not to be confused with the halberd, the poleaxe had a smaller head concentrating the kinetic energy of its blow, enabling a greater impact against opponents with armour, whereas the halberd was more effective against opponents with less armour. The poleaxe was a weapon usually used by knights and men at arms fighting on foot, and its versatility allowed it to be one of the most effective weapons in the Middle Ages. So this magnificent beauty here is the bollock dagger, a dagger that saw use in Northern Europe and the British Isles between the 13th and 18th century, and aptly named because its hilt looks like a bollocks. It was often carried as a sidearm to spears and swords on the battlefield, as well as seeing civilian use, and the hilt was made of one piece of hardwood, and you could add a lot of decoration to it to show off your status. The blade was usually around 10 to 16 inches and could take on many forms such as triangular and diamond shaped cross sections, as well as long thin points, so when you're fighting someone you can stab them in the weak points of their armour or through their visor of their helmet. Now I couldn't find any information on why the hilt was shaped like the gentleman area, but I imagine it was cheap to make, ergonomic to hold, and it'd be quite funny stabbing someone with a pair of bollocks in your hand, and it lasted well over 5 centuries, so it must have been good. During the Victorian era they did try and downplay the crudeness of the name of it though, by calling it the kidney dagger. Another magnificent beauty is the Cinquedia dagger, a lengthy blade around 18 inches long that saw popularity during the Italian Renaissance period as a civilian sidearm. Cinquedia meaning 5 fingers, which described the width of the blade at the guard, and the width is what made the dagger quite appealing to people, as you could decorate it lavishly with some absolutely majestic pieces of artwork to show off your wealth. The shape of the blade made it an excellent slashing and stabbing weapon against an unarmoured opponent during one of your midnight duels, and you could even probably use the width of the guard as a punching motion to cause some serious damage. It probably never saw use on the battlefield though, as the thick blade wasn't as good as a long, thin, slender blade at penetrating armour and finding the weak points, and it only lasted around 1 to 2 centuries, and it didn't take off like other Renaissance fashion. So this absolute lengthy beast here is the Zweihander, a 2-handed sword that could reach up to 2 meters in length and would be quite the scary prospect to face on the battlefield. Zweihander, which translates from German into two-hander, was a rather large member used during the 16th century primarily by German mercenaries known as the Landsknecht. These two-handed swordsmen often fought in the front line of their units and earned double pay for their dirty work, so they got the name of Doppelsoldners, literally meaning double paymen. They attacked enemy pike units to create a breach in the opposition lines, and the swords, due to their weight and size, were more often used like halberds and polearms rather than a sword itself, because swinging around a sword that is almost 2 meters in length, you'd be in danger of hitting your mates either side of you. The Zweihander differed from the Scottish Claymore due to it being longer in length and also having these parrying hooks along the blade, and this unsharpened segment here called the ricasso, where you could place your hands for a wider grip and get more power within your strike. Due to its size, the Zweihander would often be carried along the shoulder like this, whereas the Claymore would be sheathed along the back. The Zweihander also had a few fun variations, such as this majestic beast here, known as the Flammenschwert, translating from flame sword, named after its wavy blade. The advantage this offered over a straight blade is it could distribute the force of a strike more evenly across the blade, meaning the sword was less likely to break. However, it offered no advantages in cutting, and it often had unpleasant vibrations when parrying an attack. As gunpowder took over and pike formations lost a lot of their effectiveness, as did the Zweihander, and it didn't really have a use on the battlefield anymore. However, it would still be used a lot in the ceremonial way, because it's an absolutely beautiful beast. So this bad boy here is the Lantern Shield, an absolutely fantastic contraption that was used by the Mad Lads over in 15th and 16th century Renaissance Italy, and it was basically the Swiss Army knife of shields used to win nighttime duels. The concept was simple: get a buckler shield just around 45 centimeters in diameter and then attach a lantern to it via a hook, and the lantern's light could be unleashed at any moment. And why was this? To beat your opponents in nighttime duels by blinding them first. However, after Italian blacksmiths attached a hook to the shield, they realised, hang on lads, we can attach a lot more here, turning your arm into an orgy of sharp objects and you into a deadly killing machine. Stakes, spikes, blades, as well as pocket firearms could all be concealed within your shield TARDIS, as well as this gauntlet added for additional hand protection and mechanisms to lower as well as brighten the beam of lantern shield that is coming out of your lantern shield to blind or lessen blind your opponents. It's believed the shield was never actually used on the battlefield, probably due to how effective it would have been, and it probably would have been a war crime, so it was just used for patrolling Italian streets at night. Another such similar example which extended your arm's length was the Pata, a sword which saw its origins date back to medieval India, and the blade could be up to 1 meter long. It could be used with a sidearm, a shield, or even if you're feeling particularly adventurous, another Pata. And the peculiar thing about this weapon is that it wasn't used for thrusting and more in a slashing motion due to the way the gauntlet is held, as if you thrust into someone and catch their bone perhaps, it could twist your arm and breaking your wrist, and you don't really want that, do you?